Come on in, sit on down, Bucs fans. Today we are taking a look at Jason Licht's role as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers general manager, roster construction, offseason priorities, and the future of the franchise as the Bucs are essentially at a tipping point. We're getting into it right now. Here we go.
I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the head. It's 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25, 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Welcome back to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Mr. Evan Wanish. Today, we have got a doozy of a show for you. We've got a discussion that we're going to bring to the table, and we're going to take a big picture look at where the Bucs are right now. As we know, it has been confirmed that Todd Bowles is going to be returning as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach in 2026. The last show that we did was the post-game show after the Panthers game, and then the day after that, we did a show when we found out the Panthers were ultimately going to be making the postseason as the winners of the NFC South. The Falcons had done their job in kicking the Bucs out of the playoffs, so it gave us a head start on offseason coverage. And here we find ourselves, after the news of Todd Bowles' return, looking at some of the subsequent moves the Bucs have made. We're going to get into some of the offensive coordinator candidates today as well. But we want to bring Jason Licht into the discussion because at some point, my gut says sooner rather than later, we may or may not be having some more uncomfortable conversations about Jason Licht and the future of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I want to open up with where the Bucs are right now. Evan, haven't really had a chance to get your take on, one, the news of the Buccaneers bringing back Todd Bowles as head coach for 2026. But outside of that, the firing of offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard, a couple of other coaches were shown the door. Some guys may or may not have been forced to retire. But Todd Bowles is back, and he's essentially cleaning house in what we hope will be a blockbuster offseason for Tampa Bay. So, as it is right now, how do you view the Bucs? How do you view this decision to bring Todd Bowles back? And ultimately, where do you think they go from here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think we ever, or at least I don't think I did ever really clearly state sort of where I stood on, like, before it had happened, where I stood on, like, well, okay, should he be fired? Should he not be fired? Should there just be some staff changes? Should they, basically round it up to bad injury luck, right? And bring everybody back. I thought they probably would have been better off moving on. They probably, I don't think it was like a situation of maybe like Lovie Smith level. But if I were running things, I probably would have fired him. Just because, like, I just don't know what your ceiling with Todd Bowles is. And actually, I mean, okay, I shouldn't say that. I do know what your ceiling with Todd Bowles is, and it's not good enough for me, at least, right? To me, your ceiling with Tom Bowles, your head coach, is what we saw in 2024, right? 10-7, maybe you squeak to 11 wins. Are you going very far in the playoffs, though? I don't have much confidence in that, right? Like, you might win a playoff game. The only reason I say might is because, like, we've seen it before, right? The Todd Bowles team has won a playoff game before. But, like, I'd seen somebody else bring this up. If he doesn't win that playoff game in 2023 against Philly, does he have a job right now? Like, if he has 0 playoff wins after, being to the playoffs, oh, you won the division 3 years in a row, but you didn't go anywhere in the playoffs, right? I don't know if he has a job right now. I really don't. So I think that one playoff win's doing a lot of work for him. So I would have moved on. That being said, their decision to keep him, I think, is a few things. One, and this is the biggest one, I think. I don't think there was any other candidate out there that really like wowed them. I don't think there was any other potential guy that they could hire that they were like, this is a slam dunk, home run. And I do think they had interest in John Harbaugh. But John Harbaugh, and I do believe that report about them calling, John Harbaugh, because you have to do your due diligence, right? When something like that happens, you have to check in, right? You have to. But they were apparently met with, he kind of wants to, run the show essentially and hire his own general manager, and the Glazers didn't want to do that. So if he's out of the picture, I have to imagine they didn't like a lot of the candidates, and I think that's a big reason why Todd Bowles is back.
An interesting nugget just on the Harbaugh report mostly put it to bed. We know it's not going to happen at this point. He's been narrowing down his choices, and it seems like early on next week, we're going to hear what the move is for John Harbaugh. But there was some conflict to that report. On this week's Rondé Barber show, the Hall of Famer himself, he said that report from Ben Albright, because he's the one who initially floated it out there, about the Bucs potentially being one of the teams contacting Harbaugh and then not wanting to make the subsequent move, that GM situation you just talked about. He says that is patently false. Now, patently false can be taken a lot of different ways, but the assumption I got, and I think the impression he gave everybody else, at least what he hoped to give everybody else, is that it was less of the Bucs taking a look at Harbaugh in, I guess, what would be a backdoor manner when you've already got, the hubbub with Todd Bowles coming back. More so the agents of John Harbaugh doing the due diligence of calling teams and like saying, hey, we're available. Maybe Tampa was on his list, right? Because we did have some conversations about what that head coach opening is going to look like. And the first few days after it was announced Bowles was going to be coming back, the word that got thrown around a lot was fluid. Like, it felt like, yeah, he's back, but there's a couple things that could fall into place that may or may not affect that. Now, the Matt LaFleur situation was another one of those hypotheticals, and I say that at this point because I think it was confirmed today. Jay Glazer had put a little bit out about it as well, but it seems like Matt LaFleur is not going to be in any danger of losing his job in Green Bay, which is the right choice. Yeah, and he shouldn't be. That would have been an all-time fumble of the bag. I can't believe those were even discussions being had for as long as they had been had, because it's been at least the last 2 or 3 weeks. But going back to the original point with Todd Bowles and the situation that the Bucs now find themselves in, I agree with a lot of your sentiments in the fact that it does feel like there weren't going to be many other candidates the Bucs felt worthy of taking a huge swing on. But that leads us into the Jason Licht part of the conversation. And this entire topic stems from a listener DM that we got from David Cardona. He had mentioned that he's been listening to the show since 2017, which is kind of insane to think about. So we truly appreciate him sticking around this long. But he had drawn some comparisons to how this offseason feels, and the fact that, as I alluded to at the top of the show, we're starting to have some more uncomfortable conversations about Jason Licht here. And I don't think
some of you are.
Some people are. And let me preface this by saying it's not as dire of a situation as it's about to be framed up to be. But if you are going to take a big picture look at where the Bucs are, I think it's safe to say that, yes, it feels like they are at a tipping point. I think Jason Licht is going to have a lot to do with how the Bucs approach this offseason and not only get fans to buy back into the system right now, because, 85% of the fan base is just absolutely fed up with this team right now, as they should be. But on top of that, you got to look towards the future, and you got to turn this team back into a contender. They have to be a championship contender. You can't look at bringing Todd Bowles back and change the agenda in any way, because that's just a step backwards. So David had reached out to us and he wanted us to hit this, and I think it's a very interesting point. This is a bit of a novel, but we're going to get through it here. Now that we know Bowles is coming back, he can't help but feel like how this offseason feels very similar to the one after the 2017 season. If you remember, a lot of people wanted Dirk Cutter gone. He was the head coach at the time. The Bucs were poorly coached down the stretch. He was up on the podium saying, if I had answers, I'd know what I'd do, blah, 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 blah. We saw the up and down, topsy-turvy nature of the Jameis Winston era. And there was an experienced head coach with rumors swirling around the organization. John Gruden at the time was the hot-button topic coming back into the NFL. He would ultimately go to the Raiders, but we remember the buzz that the Bucs had between themselves and Gruden. Well, Glazers kind of went for it, but ultimately chose to keep Dirk Cutter. Fans were upset, right? In 2025, fans aren't into Todd Bowles because the defense is poorly coached. There is another experienced head coach in Harbaugh that seemingly the Glazers are going to pass, right? There is not an aggressive feeling that the Bucs are waiting for a second door option to go nab John Harbaugh, so it's just not going to happen. Both teams had come off of very successful seasons the year before. The Bucs had a pretty decent year in 2024, had a top 5 offense in the NFL. Back in 2016, you remember they had that 5-game win streak. They were 8-5 at one point, ultimately finished the season 9-7, but it was a positive record. Felt like a step in the right direction compared to the year before where I think they had 5 wins. Both teams also had a divisive quarterback, if you really do think about it, nearing the end of his contract, needed an up year. I know Jameis was only a couple of years into it, but I think he was headed into year 4 in 2018, right? Because he had 15, 16, 17. Yeah. Year 4, contract year for him. Baker Mayfield, time running out on his contract. And when you look at the second half of the season, I think that the interceptions, that's a discussion we'll have on another show, but that factors into where the Bucs are right now. He says, the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because to me, it is the first time since the 2017 offseason that Jason Licht has a hot seat. Now, I wouldn't use hot seat here, but I would say it is getting warm because as we said before, he is going to have a lot of say-so in how this offseason is going to go. And I truly think that it is going to take, I don't know how aggressive is aggressive, but more aggressive than they have been. We've talked a lot about how, the Bucs have a process of we like our guys. We trust our guys. And they trusted their guys to the detriment of the team in 2025 at different positions. Things that we were talking about before the season had even started. The linebacker position, the front 7. We told ourselves on this show before the start of the season, if Hassan Reddick isn't the guy that they need them to be, it's going to be more of the same for this Bucs pass rush. And for a large amount of the year, it was. And if I'm not mistaken, they finished with somewhere around 37, 38 sacks.
37 sacks.
Which is
the
lowest.
I just looked it up for an article. It would be the lowest total they've had since 2017, where they had 22, which is freaking incredible, by the way. 22 sacks. That's unbelievably bad.
The last time we saw Jason Licht in this position, we saw him get a little bit more aggressive as far as his offseason approach. He signed Vinny Curry and Bo Allen, which I know that those respective signings didn't exactly work out, but they were dependable veteran rotational talent. Bo Allen, I think, had a little bit better of a tenure than Vinny Curry did. They got Ryan Jensen. If I remember correctly, they traded for Jensen, or no? They just signed him in free agency.
No, they signed him. No.
They get Ryan Jensen. They trade for JPP.
Mm-hmm.
In the draft, it's very heavy defense. They get Vita Vea, Carlton Davis, Jordan Whitehead. I think Alex Kappa they got in that draft too. They signed Mike Evans to an extension. They signed Cam Brate at the time to an extension. Those were like your big money extensions. But that was more, when you look at his track history of outside help, it felt like that one was more of a swing than some of the other offseason processes we have seen. Licht knew he needed to make the team better and make a large amount of moves. Now, we know that 2018 failed, led to many changes, but I think that's kind of the tipping point the Bucs now find themselves in with the 2026 season. Here is the question here, and this is where really the baseline of this discussion is going to stem from. David says, do you think we could see this aggressive side of Licht again, given the situation of failing to meet any expectations and knowing that he could have Todd be a scapegoat if it fails again? Or do you think that an offseason not working out changed him and he will continue to pound the we like our guys mantra and keep the status quo? Now, to answer that second part, I don't think Jason Licht can afford to keep the status quo. I think if the Bucs prove that they are content with doing what they have been, they're going to continue to lose football games. And they might even lose more games next year than they lost in 2025. So I think he's in a situation where they're kind of forcing his hand in a sense. He has to get aggressive, not only with the free agent and draft acquisitions and how you plan to build this roster, overhaul the linebacker position, overhaul the front seven, maybe even add some secondary depth, just some veterans back there who may or may not be comfortable in the defense, whatever defense they are running next year. But the other thing, too, do you think we could see this aggressive side of Light given the situation and failing to meet any expectations, knowing he could have Todd be a scapegoat if it fails again? This is interesting because really the question that's being begged here, Evan, if the Bucs fail in 2026, regardless of how this offseason goes, can Jason Licht survive another collapse here with Todd Bowles? And I know that the argument is like, yeah, he got saddled up with Bowles. Bruce Arians ultimately was the vocal part of getting him here. But, you know, if the Bucs have a second half slump, I mean, if they just collapse in any way, shape, or form, and we're talking about the roster and the shortcomings of different position groups that the Buccaneers could have addressed instead of going best player available in the first round, you know, ultimately, where do you find Jason Licht with this upcoming offseason and then, I don't want to say impending collapse, but at this point, I don't have much reason to believe we're not going to see some kind of slump next year with Bowles' track history. I know that I have been rambling, but I am going to hand it over to you, my friend. Your take on this entire situation.
Okay. So I've been chomping at the bit a little bit because I've been seeing some stuff in the chat, and I'll address that then. But to get to your question, and I think based on some of the people in the chat, I'm going to be like the most overhated, like the most hated person in the world, I guess. I do believe he can survive and will survive Todd Bowles potentially being fired because one of the reasons you said that was not his hire. And I saw also somebody had mentioned the other day, like on some social media, I don't remember, it all blends together at this point, but about him, you know, how many GMs can get, you know, 4 or 5 cracks at this thing. Lovie Smith was hired before him. So that doesn't count. So take out Lovie Smith. Dirk Cutter, you can kind of, I guess, say he was hired, but like, look, when they fired Lovie, we all kind of knew where that was headed, right? Like, there wasn't going to be really anybody. Dirk Cutter was the heavy favorite for that job. Then Cutter's fired, and that was the one time where Light, I do believe his job was in legitimate danger. Okay, they hadn't won. Cutter was fired. It wasn't working out. I do believe that he was in legitimate, like, hot water there. Then they hired Bruce Arians, which, again, when Cutter's fired, you kind of point the finger at one guy. That's Bruce Arians, right? You're kind of like, yeah, he's probably the guy, you know? And then, obviously, so, like, how much of a light hire is that, basically, is what I'm saying, right? And then Bowles gets basically picked by Arians. And at that point, even if Arians said, oh, I'm just retiring and you can do whatever you want with Bowles, it was late March. What are they going to do in late March? Try to find a head coach, you know? So, I do think Jason Licht would survive. Now, that being said, I'm assuming that when they're winning 7, 8, 9 games, maybe they still miss the playoffs. If they win 2 games, okay, maybe that changes things, right? But I really, really don't think the Glazers want to go through and do the firing the GM and the head coach at the same time again. They did it with Mark Dominic and Greg Schiano, and it did not work out well. The following season was a 2-14 season, right? Then they did that previously when they hired Raheem Morris and Mark Dominic, firing John Gruden and Bruce Allen, and that season was 3-13. So it has not worked out well the next season when the Glazers have typically done that. So I don't think they want to do that. I think they would give, let's say they go 8-9 next year, right? Let's say they miss the playoffs again, and at that point, I do believe Todd Bowles would be fired or retire or whatever. Regardless, the Bucs have a new head coach. I think Jason Licht would probably get his chance to pick his head coach, and then that would be it. Like, if that head coach fails, then Jason's gone. But I do believe that, yes, he would get an opportunity there. There's a lot of stuff in the chat.
A lot of draft picks in the chat.
And look, 55 people in here right now on a random Saturday. We know playoff football's going on right now. We appreciate all you guys tuning in. But there's some people that like, oh, Jason Light's not a top 15 GM. And and I understand it depends on who you ask, right? But if you're gonna ask me, I think he's like a top. So I'm right now, right? I have on my computer screen, I have a list of all the general managers in the league. And I don't see many that I would prefer over Jason Light. You got Howie Roseman, John Schneider in Seattle, um, Les Snead in Los Angeles,
Would you put
maybe
John Lynch?
It's close. It's close between those two. Brett Veach in Kansas City, um, Brad Holmes in Detroit is a pretty good one as well. Like I don't know, man. Eric DaCosta in Baltimore is a good one. Brandon Bean in Buffalo.
I'm sure there's going to be some fun conversations about Eric DaCosta a year from now, ultimately, depending on where Baltimore ends up.
Yeah, so basically, but I'm of the mindset that Jason Light's actually like a top 7 or 8 general manager in the entire NFL. And then one person brought up in the chat how good general managers don't draft kickers in the second round. Really quick, can we stop talking about something that happened literally in April? It will be a decade.
People don't forget.
Can we stop?
People don't forget,
Like,
man.
Can we not hold? You know what he's done in that time? They've gone to the playoffs a bunch of times. They won a Super Bowl. So I think it's okay. Like, that was his 3rd year as a general manager. He's going on year 10, like, or to year 12 even. Can we stop? Like, stop. If you want to criticize Jason Light, and look, we will, right? Because part of this is his fault. But let's not use that anymore, okay? We criticized that enough. It wasn't like it wasn't criticized in the moment and when it didn't work out, right? It was criticized. But and also, I can just tell you this little tidbit of information too. It wasn't 100% a Jason Light decision. I have that from multiple people. But just let's not use that, right? So I think Jason Light is very good. At the same time, and we'll get into this, a little more specifically as the show goes on. But at the same time, yes, he needs to be better. And the whole we like our guys thing, to me, yeah, I agree. That's not acceptable this offseason, right? And I'm not saying you have to go out and, they need to trade for Max Crosby and they need to sign the top 2 free agents and they need, like, that doesn't work, right? We've seen that type of thing doesn't work. Look to 2014, right? Jason Light's first offseason, where it was kind of Lovie Smith sort of steering the ship there at that point. But Jason Light, they made a splash, right? They signed all these free agents. What'd that get them? They got a number 1 overall pick the following year. So yeah. I do think, though, a offseason like 2018, right? What was the biggest thing with a lot of those names you mentioned? None of those, they're good players, but none of them were like the top names available, right? It wasn't like, Ryan Jensen, he's the best free agent out there, or Bo Allen or Vinny Curry. They were both, I think Allen was a free agent, but Vinny Curry was cut by the Eagles, and then the Bucs picked them up. So I'm looking for something like that. To sort of flood a position, right? Flood whether it's edge rusher or linebacker. Obviously, the Bucs are going to have to hit up both. But I'm looking for something similar to the 2018 offseason. And I do have faith that, look, whether it's going to work or not, I don't know. But I have enough faith in Jason Light that I think he's going to try. Like, there's going to be an effort here. Because I think, I think he knows, like, there's real change on the way, whether it's him or not. That's going to happen if he doesn't deliver this offseason.
Let's bring draft picks into the conversation a little bit, appease the people in the chat. It's provocative. It gets the people going. But when we look at
I don't know why we're mentioning Noah Spence. He's great. So
that's your guy, man. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, this is the wrong show to talk about Noah Spence. With Jason Light, and again, kind of sticking to his guns in the draft process, I think it is apparent that when you look at some of the biggest needs for the Bucs team in 2026, you're talking about edge rushers, you're talking about supplementing some more guys along that defensive line, you're talking about completely overhauling the linebacker room, and there's some quality players here in the draft. So when it comes to linebacker, like, you are planning for the future, because the assumption right now, nothing is confirmed as of this recording, but the assumption is Levante David's not going to be back. And it would be malpractice to expect Servassier Dennis to be your starting linebacker once again in this defense. It's just not going to happen. He can be a 2. He can be a rotational guy. You can bring him in on
Well, that's the
passing
thing.
downs.
In Bowles' defense, you need 2 starters, though. So,
Yeah.
I need Servante Dance to be my 3. And, right now, he's on a rookie contract. I'm fine keeping him for cheap depth, but he cannot be out there for 100% of the snaps for you every Sunday.
So let me talk to you about how the Bucs build this roster, draft picks coming into the conversation, because when you look at the Jason Licht process, we like our guys. He can hit some home runs in the draft. But when I look at the positions the Bucs are most needy in, and you weigh your offseason priorities, cap space is going to factor into this too. But let's just say they want to target a guy like Max Crosby, which I am not against. I think that is something they should strongly consider. F them picks, as far as I'm concerned. But in your opinion, again, looking at Light's track record here, the process that we know and we are fully aware of, where do you lean with ultimately where these draft picks are going to end up? Do you put a little bit more stock in going out and getting that guy who can not only just level up that position group, but the rest of your locker room? Like a guy who, a guy that we've been talking about, and in the Max Crosby case, a little bit of a D-bag that we have mentioned before. The Bucs are lacking those, I think, on the defensive side of the ball. Do you go out and you get a guaranteed dog and you cross the bridge when you come to it when it comes to the cap situation? Or do you ultimately trust him to just hang on to those picks and build a little bit more in the draft? Because the reason I beg this question, we know the process. We know he can hit on guys in the draft. He can't hit on pass rushers to save his life. I know Kalijah Cansey's got some chops, and unfortunately the kids can't stay on the field.
No,
but when you look
guys
at
don't count.
The interior guys don't count. So when you look at that outside linebacker group, and again, scheme change may or may not be on the table for the Bucs here, but edge rushers. When you look at edge rushers, do you trust Jason Licht, or do you think they just need to cut their losses, get a little bit more aggressive, and go get their guy?
I think there's 2 trains of thought here, because I think on one hand you could say, yep, he can't do it. Let's just admit that and move on, and we'll get an established guy. And at the same time, they've had some misses, but they haven't, and this has been one of my complaints too, they haven't really, to me, invested enough draft capital into that edge room. And I'm not talking about potential picks. I'm talking about where they're picked. Okay? Yaya Diaby, a 3rd-round pick. Chris Braswell, a 2nd-round pick. Sure, Drew Trine-Shalinka was a 1st-round pick. He was 32nd overall. That's basically a 2nd-round pick.
David Walker.
Go ahead. Yeah, David, 4th-round pick. Anthony Nelson, 4th-round pick. So I'm curious with a top 15 pick, because this wasn't established last time we spoke to you guys. The Buccaneers have the 15th overall pick in the NFL draft. With a top 15 pick, does that change things, right? Does that level up the player that you can get, right? At 15 there. The other thing is when I look at it, there's been opportunities. It's not like, they haven't had opportunities to draft those guys. Last year, they drafted Emeka Egbuka, 19th overall. And sure, I understand this player went way later, but you could have gotten a little creative. Like Davin Ezeraku was there. That was a guy that was very popular to the Buccaneers. I believe I had him mocked to the Buccaneers. He was there. So, a lot of the times it seems like he's wanting to hit the home run without. And I actually established, I forget if I did on this show or I was just talking. He wants to hit that, turn that $10 lottery ticket, right, into $10,000. Whereas if he buys the $30 lottery ticket, he has a better shot at that, right? So he wants to keep scratching the $5 and the $10 tickets, hoping to hit it big. But that your odds of hitting it big are less likely doing it that way. So the more you spend, the more likely you're going to get it, right? It's a higher risk, it's a higher reward as well, though. So I understand where people are coming from. I think there's a medium, though, between trading for Max Crosby, because a couple of things. One, trading for Max Crosby is going to require probably 2 first-round picks, probably your first-round pick this year and probably your first-round pick next year.
Do it.
And the other thing, the cap implications as well. And also, just saying, everybody's kind of weird how everybody's like, "Oh my God, Bowles is back. Next season's a disaster." But let's trade our first round pick for next season. Like that's I don't know. It's kind of like okay, well, clearly you don't think it's gonna be that much of a disaster because why would you be trading what you think is gonna be a top 10 pick? But
What?
look, I do think really to sum it up really quick. Um, I think Jason Licht needs to go out and get a veteran, right? But then also supplement that in the draft. The type of veteran you get, yeah, sure, you might not have to invest a first round pick then in an edge rusher. But if you get a guy in like the bargain bin, basically, then yeah, I would hope that that 15th overall pick might be an edge rusher.
Yeah, and you know what? A couple of interesting points stem from that, and I really like the analogy with the lottery tickets. I'm gonna borrow that one. Um, but when we look at this draft process and we look at again the track history, the track record, excuse me, that Jason Licht has, we talk about him excelling specifically in the mid rounds, right? The Bucs have had a lot of hits in the second, third, fourth round. Tez Johnson going as late as he was a pretty big contributor for the Bucs in 2025, and hopeful for that to continue. But with what you said about the lottery tickets, you look at these first round picks, and I guess even some of these mid round picks, but it basically Jason Licht, from a roster perspective, going into 2025, he puts this team in a position where, much like you said, you're trying to turn that $10 ticket into a $10,000 ticket. And you know what you have to do partially to do that? You got to hope. And I just don't think that's sustainable, right? You have to hope that every player you draft is enough of a contributor, or basically the best scenario possible. Like, I think Tez Johnson and the way that his 2025 season played out, that is probably the best possible scenario, especially when you consider the other context of the Bucs losing all of their wide receivers over the course of the season. Like, he had to step up and play well, and he did just that. That is the best possible scenario. He could have been another Jalen Darden, and he wasn't, seemingly, in his rookie season. So that's good to see. But we talk about these resources. If I already trust Jason Licht to hit his guys in the second, third, fourth, fifth round, me personally, I don't have a problem giving up 2 firsts when we have yearly discussions of, oh, did he just get cute? Because in the first round, this upcoming draft, I think the Bucs, 6 out of those 7 picks are going to have to be defensive players. Just from a pure team building standpoint, maybe you get a couple of depth offensive linemen, but I'd prefer
maybe.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of positions on the offensive side of the ball you could cater to, but I think it's got to mostly be defense. And with those first round picks, taking defensive players, Vita Vea is a good one. A lot of people were upset about the Derwin James thing that year, but all of that aside, I think it ultimately just depends on how you feel about those first round picks. And Light has proven to not be a guy who is willy-nilly with those first round picks, but I think the pressure is on a little bit this offseason. And yeah, maybe it puts you in a bind a little bit from a cap perspective, and that's going to factor into how you build the rest of this team. It makes it harder to get linebackers if you go out and get a Max Crosby, but I think the juice that guy brings, or any player that you could go out and target with 2 first-round draft picks, not saying that's what it has to be. You can bundle it up differently. We know deals are always done in interesting fashion, but I feel like that's more of a sure thing than a Donovan Ezeraku, right? Because you're also asking a lot for that guy, and you still have to build around him. You still have to go target other free agents. I like the idea of going out and getting that guy and figuring it out afterwards, especially when we're talking about first-round picks and the tendency that Light seems to have this time of year. It feels, I don't want to say desperation, but it feels like the Bucs need a move like that.
My bigger issue with the whole first round pick thing, and really quick, Josh Capo also, I believe he did an article or did something along the line. He works for Pewter Report, kind of threw cold water on the Max Crosby thing, just because of financially, the Raiders, I guess, would it's something where they would actually need to spend way more money than they would have to spend $95 million this offseason or something if they traded Max Crosby or something like that, and that's not really feasible. So he really doesn't expect Max Crosby to be traded at all. So we will see. But my thing is not necessarily with this year's pick, right? The 15th overall, you know what that is. It's the following year's pick, right? Because man, that could be anything. And if
Could be a
people are really
quarterback.
not a believer in Bowles and not a believer in this roster, or would you be willing to trade the 15th overall pick and the 8th overall pick for Max Crosby? I think people would change their tune a little bit. So we will see what happens. I'm not expecting the Buccaneers to trade for Max Crosby. Not saying they wouldn't check in. I think probably 25 other teams would check in as well. But I don't really expect them to do something like that. But he does need to be more aggressive. And like to me, again, that medium is that Jason Pierre-Paul type trade, right? Trading. Not don't trade your first round pick. Maybe trade your third round pick for a veteran edge rusher, right? Who's had some success, right? Maybe do something like that instead of like the big gun, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I understand like it's tempting and it would be a game changer for the defense, but just not sure how feasible that is, especially when they need more than one thing. It's not like, oh my God, this team is an edge rusher away, and as soon as they get that, they're great. Like, no, like we talked about it. They need linebackers. They need a little bit of depth at corner, probably. Maybe a little bit of depth on the defensive line. Like I said, multiple line, not just one linebacker either, right? They need some offensive line depth. Like, how are you going to get those things? The other thing, there's some questions about quarterback, isn't there? Like, if you're having questions about quarterback, trading your 2027 first round pick is not the way you want to do it. Like, so it's a risk. And I understand, look, no risk it, no biscuit, right? Like, there's a lot of things that the Bucs had to risk, to get that Super Bowl, obviously. And eventually you're going to have to take that swing. But I'm just not sure if that's the swing that they're going to take. I do think Jason Licht's going to be pretty aggressive, but I'm not sure if he's going to be that aggressive. But I definitely understand the thing of like, hey, draft picks are draft picks, and you know, winning cures all, right? And if the Buccaneers win and that pick is actually, 28th, all right, yeah, you're not going to care as much because you went to the NFC Championship game and Max Crosby was awesome for you and, like whatever. But there's a way that could backfire. So we'll see.
All fair points, and everybody hanging out in chat, we'd like to hear from you as well. Drop your Bucs takes as we continue this conversation. The offseason outlook,
Really quick.
Jason
There's
Licht.
Jason Light's seat should be on fire. Why? Like, I just,
Well,
I don't,
and I don't want to speak for our friend in the chat here, but I think a lot of that conversation just circles back to the roster. We can talk about the coaching issues, the conservative nature from Todd Bowles that we saw in the second half of the season. Those are issues. There are coaching issues with this team. The Yaya Diaby comments in the locker room, that was damning stuff. When you've got veterans and guys who are trying to take accountability and guys who are consistently lost because they're doing too many walkthroughs, and with too many walkthroughs, you got guys who don't pay attention. They're just going through the motions rather than getting that full speed. It's not like they got to be at practice beating the hell out of each other, but I mean, you've got players on and off the record who were coming out complaining about the process this season. That is on coaching 100%. But the main argument that people are going to have, especially on the defensive side of the ball, quarterback play was a thing down the stretch. We talked about it every single week on this show. We are not shying away from it, and we are going to get into it, just not today, because that's a conversation that's going to take about 45 minutes to an hour. But on the defensive side of the ball, you come away from these games and you're looking at these young players who were consistently lost. You look at the linebacker position in the front seven that we've mentioned like 8 times up until this point of the show. And the one major takeaway that everybody has is like, man, the Bucs need some dudes on the defensive side of the ball. They just do. And like that is, again, where a lot of the finger pointing is going to be in Jason Licht not addressing some of those positions more. The trade deadline thing is trivial, right? We had that conversation where there was nobody available at the trade deadline for the resources the Bucs had that was going to be worthwhile. It just was what it was at that point. But you can make a major argument about the linebacker room and everything else that we've talked about, the shortcomings in different position groups heading into the season, because those were known issues all the way back at OTAs. We were like, man, it's going to be interesting if they add any more talent, who they're going to be relying on. David Walker going down was a killer. Curious to see how much of a contributor he would have been, but it was unfair to expect him to be what the Bucs needed. And I don't think even if he was fully healthy, he would have changed very much.
He's not solving anything for that.
Right. He wouldn't have changed the outcome of this Bucs pass rush. But yeah, it's the roster, man. It is just the fact that the Bucs need some dudes. And Jason Licht is the one who can really do the most to acquire said dudes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I will say, though, I also think it's on the coaching staff to develop some of these guys. Like Logan Hall was a second-round pick. Has he been properly developed? Who knows? JTS was a first-round pick. Was he developed? And I think, Yaya Diaby, I think he's a good player. And I think he's probably reached his cap. I think he's probably on a good team. He's probably a 2, maybe a 3 on a really good team.
Yeah, if you got a stacked room.
But yeah, but he's probably a 2, I guess. But they have him as a 1. And that's a problem, right? You signed Hassan Reddick, it was a miss. That's on Jason Licht. That definitely is. You need to be better than that. And Chris Braswell, I didn't agree with the pick at the time. It's looking like a big miss.
God,
But also here's the thing, and there's been some discussion in the chat about Jason Licht, and he misses. Look at all the misses he's had. One, he hasn't had that many over the past 5-6 years. There's not that many. And 2, every single general manager has misses. You are never going to bat 1,000 in the NFL draft. It's not going to happen. So, everybody loves Howie Roseman, right? He picked Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. Everybody is going to have those misses. So, and again, I'm not saying, obviously, Jason Licht needs to be better. Chris Braswell in the second. It's bad, right? It's not great. And he's had some other ones, even earlier. MJ Stewart in the second round. That one wasn't a great one. There's been a few others, JTS in the first. You can talk a lot about these, but every GM has those misses, right? So I do think there's people being a little bit too hard on Jason Licht. They're going the other way a little bit too much, for me at least right now. Was he an issue? Yeah. Does he need to be better? Yes. But also I don't think he's even a top 5 issue on this team. There's a lot more wrong with the team than just Jason Licht, and I think it's honestly kind of ridiculous to suggest that his seat could be on the hot seat at all. I think the 2026 season would have to be catastrophic for his seat to be hot. It would have to be truly awful for his seat to be hot. So I really don't see it. But again, it's worth a discussion because this year, yeah, he had shortcomings. They bet on Servase Dennis. It didn't work. They bet on Chris Braswell and Hassan Reddick. It did not work. Levante David, you knew he was getting up there in age. You've seen it for the past couple of years. He's not the same player. This isn't 2016 Levante David out there where he might be able to mask a little bit of Servase Dennis' shortcomings, right? He might be able to help that out and maybe make that look a little bit better than it actually is. That's not the same guy out there right now, though. So, yeah, and before that, the year before, bet on KJ Britt. That didn't work. So, yeah, there is things that he needs to do better, and I expect there's going to be a lot of changes all season. Let's put that out there, especially on defense. This team is going to look a lot different, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And whether it works or not, I don't know, but I think Jason Licht is going to at least try.
Let's talk about the other part of the offseason process and really catch things up to where we are right here in this moment. The Buccaneers fired offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard after only 1 season as the head play caller in Tampa Bay. They are moving their sights forward. I'm going to go through some of these interview candidates here, and we're just going to go one by one. I want to get your take on each of them in order of where these guys were interviewed. The Buccaneers had a virtual interview with former Titans head coach Brian Callahan. He was fired mid-season in 2025. He interviewed for the OC job. Now, I know it's an overwhelming, yuck with this one for a lot of people, but the important context here to mention, and with a lot of these candidates, is that just because he's not a good head coach doesn't mean he's a bad offensive coordinator. But either way, Brian Callahan at offensive coordinator is not necessarily a name that blows me away. Maybe it's a due diligence thing. Maybe the Bucs just want to learn a little bit from this guy throughout the process. But your thoughts on Brian Callahan interviewing for Bucs OC?
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing with a lot of the names that they've interviewed so far, but particularly with Callahan because he was the a former head coach and most recently was a head coach basically. Just because you failed as a head coach literally has no correlation to a coordinator. Okay, whether you like him or not, like you may not like him, you may be like but like your reasoning for me at least cannot be well he was terrible as Tennessee's head coach. That doesn't matter. Like there's a lot of teams that would love Todd Bowles as their defensive coordinator. It didn't really work as a head coach. Vic Fangio is regarded as the best defensive coordinator, one of the best of all time. It didn't work with him as a head coach. Josh McDaniels is a pretty good offensive coordinator. Didn't work with him as a head coach multiple times. So, like, some dudes are just that. Now, I understand in Cincinnati, I don't believe he called plays in Cincinnati, but he was the offensive coordinator when they went to the Super Bowl. So there is some good things there. Was also on the Broncos with Peyton Manning for a couple years as well as an offensive assistant. So that's another sign, some pretty good offenses there with the Peyton Manning Broncos. So he's had some good things. I don't think he's going to get the job, but it is, just cast a wide net. And there's a couple of things I want to say because I'm sure there are some people that kind of are wondering about these names or where is a Nate Shieldhouse, where is Todd Monken, a Mike McDaniel, right? Shieldhouse cannot interview anywhere until next week, whether the Rams win or lose. If they win, he's allowed to interview next week. If they lose, obviously their season's over, but he can't interview anywhere until next week. So that wasn't a possibility yet. Mike McDaniel and Todd Monken, I think they're both probably going to see if they can get a head coaching job. If they can't, I think then they'll sort of be like, okay, we're more open to OC opportunities. But those two guys, Shieldhouse, they can't interview right now, and then Monken and McDaniel, I think, are gonna kind of wait and see thing.
Let me ask you a quick sidebar question on Monken. And this is just kind of an overall feeling that I have, and I'm curious who shares the same sentiment. There were reports coming out of Baltimore that Todd Monken was kind of one of the big hangups as far as John Harbaugh no longer being their head coach. I guess it was presented to him that he would have had to move on to Monken. He said that's not going to be an option, and the ownership moved swiftly thereafter. So I kind of feel like, Monken would be a favorite in Tampa. We've talked about him before on the show as well. He's up there on my list, right? I think it's pretty much Shieldhouse, Todd Monken, and Mike McDaniel would be the fun option there. But those are kind of the top three, I think, consensus-wise that everybody has on their list. Do you feel like Monken's just tied to Harbaugh and ultimately wherever he ends up? Because, that's a loyalty check if there ever was one. And I'm not saying it feels like a weird move to go take a head coaching job because this is what Monken has been considered for in the past. But even when he's interviewed for head coaching jobs, he's ultimately ended up back in Baltimore coaching Lamar Jackson under John Harbaugh. Do you feel like, Harbaugh to Miami and New York is really the two big ones right now? Do you think Todd Monken would follow suit?
I think it's possible. I don't think it's a definite though. There are a lot of people in the Bucs building that still like Todd Monken. Todd Monken did enjoy his time in Tampa, and Todd Monken coached Baker Mayfield previously. So I think I don't want to say Todd Monken's the favorite in Tampa right now, but I think there's a solid chance that he ends up being the guy. We'll see what happens. But he is getting head coaching looks. Like I believe he's interviewing for the Browns job. But I also I think it's definitely a possibility that Harbaugh's like, yeah, like you're my guy, like it's gonna be your offense, like whether I'm in New York or Miami or Cleveland or wherever it may be, like you're gonna be my guy, and he says, yeah, like that's definitely a possibility. But I think the Bucs have a real shot at Todd Monken, unlike 3 years ago, I guess at this point.
Yeah.
When they hired Dave Canales and they interviewed Monken before that, seemed like a long shot, but I think this time around they have a shot at Monken.
Next up on the list for Tampa Bay, the Bucs interviewed former Falcons OC Zach Robinson. He's been in Atlanta for the last 2 seasons, but he also won a Super Bowl with the Rams. Did not call plays during his time there, but he crossed paths with Baker Mayfield during his time with LA. He was there from 2019 to 2023, worked his way up from assistant QB's coach to assistant wide receiver coach, assistant QB coach in 2021, and then he was promoted to pass game coordinator and assistant QB coach in 22 and 23. As we mentioned, been in the Falcons as their offensive coordinator the last 2 seasons. Your thoughts on Zach Robinson? I'm not, again, I think it's a little bit different than Callahan. I'm not necessarily blown away by Robinson, but I don't think he's as god awful as of an option as maybe a lot of people may think.
No, obviously so the Bucks interviewed him 2 years ago when they hired Liam Cohen. And I was really intrigued by Zach Robinson. He was from the Rams, obviously that Sean McVay tree, and obviously Cohen was too. But I believe Robinson obviously Cohen was at Kentucky when he got hired by the Bucks. Robinson was with the Rams when he interviewed with the Bucks, and then obviously that same offseason got hired by Atlanta. And I was like, oh, that feels like a good hire for Atlanta, because like I said, I like Zach Robinson. The shine has worn off his star a little bit, obviously. I do think part of that is the QB play in Atlanta. It was very inconsistent. You got Kirk Cousins first year. He ends up getting benched at the end for Michael Penix. Then Penix this year was really up and down. He ends up getting hurt. Kirk Cousins has to come back in. So I don't know. I'd probably aim a little bit higher, but like I also don't think he's the worst fallback option in the world because I think maybe a different circumstance. Like I'm always going to be willing to bet on a Sean McVay tree guy. Just always just willing to give it a shot. But we'll see because like his Atlanta stuff wasn't that encouraging. But I don't know. Like I said, I this was 2 years ago. It'd be a lot more encouraging for me than it is now, and we'll see what happens.
I think some added context here too when we talk about the offensive coordinator search. How present do you think the notion is that Todd Bowles is essentially hiring his replacement? And not even with the context that like, oh, he's gonna lose a bunch next year and he's gonna get fired next season and this guy's gonna be the interim and then they promote him. I don't think it's gonna happen that way. I think really with Bowles, we're just gonna get more of the same until he's no longer here. But it's the context that he's going to be retiring soon. And that's not hearsay. That's not just, oh, let's look at his age. That is directly from the horse's mouth. Like he has gone on the record multiple times over the last 2 seasons and been like, yeah, we're probably going to be wrapping it up soon. Like I think he put out a window of 5 years last year. So let's say we got 3-4 years left, and maybe that's even being generous.
I think that.
I think it's
I
being
think that's
generous
generous.
as well because, we even talked about him retiring this offseason versus being faced with termination. But like, is that a topic with the offensive coordinator? And then you talk about aiming higher. Like that has to be a factor when you look at the head coach ability of some of these candidates. Like Brian Callahan, yuck. Zach Robinson, yuck. Nate Schillhouse feels like a huge swing, but I think arguably, even comparing him to like a Todd Monken or a Mike McDaniel, I feel like it's a big swing, but it also may have the most upside given that not so much with Monken, but like with McDaniel, he has a track record as a head coach, right? And everybody's going to have opinions about him. I think he'd be a solid choice. I think it'd be a fun choice, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But like, that has to factor into the conversation at some point, right? Because you ultimately beg the question, who's going to want to come here knowing that Bowles is in a critical year, but also looking at a Bucs team who has had 5 offensive coordinators in the last 5 seasons. Like, what kind of conversations are being had to stop this guy from coming in here, looking at the Bucs as a stopgap job, and we are back having the same conversation where the ceiling with Todd Bowles is a stud OC who leaves and goes somewhere else because the Bucs are too stubborn to move on. I think with retirement looming, like that has to be present in the conversation with these guys.
Yeah, I think some. I don't know about these particular two, especially not Callahan, because like I say, he just had a shot at being a head coach. So like maybe a guy like Robinson. 2 things they have in common though. They've called plays, right? And that's a big thing, right? When we talk about Todd Monken or Mike McDaniel, and that's what I think is working against a guy like Nate Schillhouse because he hasn't called plays, and I think the Bucs are more inclined this time around to go with a guy who has called plays before at the NFL level. And that's why I say at the NFL level, because I've seen people bring up to me, well, he called plays in college. Yes, he did, but he's never called plays at the NFL level. And the Bucs have taken some swings, right? And they worked with Canales, who never called plays at either level before. Um, Cohen had only called like a handful of games in the NFL, but he called college games. And Grizzard, I don't believe it ever called games either. So the Bucs have taken some swings there, but I don't think Todd Bowles can afford to put all of his eggs in the unproven basket. As much as I think they like Nate Shieldhouse, but I don't know if that's a road they want to go down. So like I said, both Brian Callahan and Zach Robinson both have play calling experience. I think that's sort of more of a likely scenario than Nate Shieldhouse.
Some more OC candidates for Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers this week, today actually, interviewed Lions pass game coordinator David Shaw for their offensive coordinator job. I have a lot of background information on this guy. In credit to
used to be a hot name in terms of college ranks and jumping to the NFL to be a head coach.
So David Shaw, he was the head coach at Stanford for 12 years, from 2011 to 2022. He left Stanford as the winningest coach in program history. He had 96 wins, 3 Pac-12 titles, RIP, and 8 bowl games. He was chosen as the conference's coach of the year 4 times, the most in Pac-12 history. After taking a few years off, in 2025, he joined the Lions as their pass game coordinator. He had a hand in developing a Lions offense that ranked 5th in points per game at 28.3 and yards per game at 373.2. Detroit also ranked 3rd in yards per play with 5.97, passing yards per game at 253.1, and interception percentage at 1.37, while also fielding the league's 8th best red zone offense. He has experience with the NFL all the way back from 1997 to 2005. He was with the Eagles, the Raiders, and the Ravens. He coached both the QBs and the wide receivers for Baltimore on Brian Billick's staff from 2002 to 2004 before concentrating on receivers in 2005. So this is a guy who has certainly been there, done that, and really, has a couple of different hats when you look at his coaching history here. Your surface reaction to David Shaw interviewing for Bucs OC?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not a guy who, like, I think he's 53 years old, so it's not like the young hot shot, guy. But he has had success, and yes, it has been at the college level, of course. But he's also had a lot of experience, right, being around NFL locker rooms, NFL teams. So it's not like it would be like an insane jump for him to be like, oh man, like yeah, I only had a year in Detroit, now I am overmatched here in this role. Like I think he could handle it fine. Again, it's kind of like the Zach Robinson thing though, where I'm like, would probably wish he would aim a little bit higher. And also these interviews, like everybody freaks out about interviews, right? Like, relax. Like they didn't hire him. Like it's okay if you don't like the guy. It's okay if they interview him. Like it's fine. Sometimes it's a conversation, right? Like, and just because they interview him, they may come out of that interview and say, "Oh no, like this guy is not what we're looking for." It's just trying to get as much information. Do your due diligence. It's just trying to get as much of that as possible, right? So I'm not really going to overreact to him getting an interview. I think it'd be fine. I don't know. I mean, but again, just feels like they can probably aim a little bit higher. And in this case, I would probably rather you get a guy that maybe is like a little bit more unproven than a David Shaw, because it just feels like kind of like a meh type hire.
Yeah. We got one more offensive coordinator interview candidate for you, and then we're going to talk about a couple of the other guys before we wrap up here. The Bucs interviewed Cardinals QB coach Israel Woolfolk for their offensive coordinator job. He began his NFL coaching career in 2022 with the Cleveland Browns. He was the recipient of the team's Bill Willis Coaching Fellowship Award. He was hired by new Arizona head coach Jonathan Gannon in 2023 to tutor the team's passers. Relatively young guy. Again, another name that isn't...
This is an unknown here, for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there is a lot to take away here other than the fact that he is a young, unknown guy. Is this another due diligence candidate here? Your thoughts on Woolfolk?
Well, here's the little interesting thing. So obviously the Cardinals, they fired Jonathan Gannon, right? So could you maybe be, yes, interviewing him for an offensive coordinator role, but maybe you consider him, I don't know, the Bucs just fired their quarterbacks coach. Hmm. You know, maybe you're considering him for a different role, and like you talk to him and sort of get to know him a little bit. And maybe if you like what you hear, I don't know, so just something. I'm not saying that's what's happening. But just sort of like maybe, yeah, they talked to him about the offensive coordinator role, but you know, they decided not to, and he ends up being the quarterback's coach or on the offensive staff in some way. Because again, he's most likely going to be available for anybody to hire him. Because I would imagine that once the Cardinals get a head coach, they're probably going to want to bring in their own guys. So right now, he technically is employed by the Arizona Cardinals. Technically, Zach Robinson is employed by the Atlanta Falcons. Which another red flag on Robinson, really quick. So the Cowboys wanted to interview Jeff Ulbrich, their defensive coordinator, and they were denied that request because technically Ulbrich is still with the Falcons. The Falcons allowed the Buccaneers to interview Zach Robinson. So just another red flag. They were like, "Oh yeah, we're good. Like, yeah, you can go interview that guy. That's fine." Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I doubt this guy gets the job, but like to me, this is the first of the four, that have like completely unknown, right? Like you never heard of these guys at all. Um, but again, somebody you gotta start somewhere, right? Like you have to start your coaching career at some point, and maybe it's now. So we'll see. But yeah, again, it wouldn't shock me if maybe they're just doing their due diligence on a guy who might be on the staff in maybe a different role than offensive coordinator.
All right, let's have some fun here as we wrap things up. Grant Yadinsky, the offensive coordinator out of Jacksonville, has been a name on the radar, obviously. But I think an interesting tidbit here is the fact that if the Bucs were to interview him for anything other than a head coach job, Jacksonville has the right, and probably would, just deny that interview request. We know that when Liam Cohen took the head coaching job in Jacksonville, the Bucs had a couple of interview requests denied on their behalf. I have no expectation that Liam Cohen would not do the exact same thing. So as much as I love the idea of a Grant Yadinsky, on paper, he looks like he would be an awesome guy. And I think within the next couple of years, maybe even this cycle, he could be looked at as a potential head coaching candidate. One of those young guys.
That's not even a Bucs thing. That's just like any NFL team. Like they're not letting Grant Yadinsky go. So.
Right. I mean, the guy's 28, 29 years old.
29,
so yeah, he would be, if we're talking about head coach consideration, he would far and away be the youngest coach in NFL history. So that's a huge swing. But with a lot of these young guys, you look at the upside. Just for fun, Grant Yadinsky here, your 2 cents.
I mean, again, I think he's good. Bucs interviewed him last year, so obviously they liked him enough to give him an interview. But again, it's just, you're not getting Grant Yadinsky on your staff unless he's your head coach. So because again, and that's not a Liam Cohen trying to screw over the Bucs thing. Jacksonville would probably do that for anybody. So. And I would expect not this cycle. It feels like next cycle though. Assuming Jacksonville still has some success next year, like if they do, like yeah, Udinski's going to be, I think, a pretty popular name in next year's cycle for a head coach.
All right.
Yeah.
Last guy I want to talk to you about. We've been saving him for last, and I honestly, like, if we're gonna have a number one on the list, he would probably be my number one. Just from a veteran standpoint, right? Having a little bit more of a veteran voice. In the desperation that, Todd Bowles can't really wait for the process to play out for a green offensive coordinator. I don't think he can afford that. Mike McDaniel, freshly fired from Miami, is now back on the market, has a couple of head coach interviews lined up, has a couple of OC interviews lined up. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN initially floated the report out there that he would be open to a, quote, new challenge, and said to not rule out the Buccaneers in this conversation. And then, 2 days later, he stoked the flames again with the classic eyeball emojis, and that got everybody kind of in a frenzy for at least a half hour.
Well, Jeff Darlington very plugged in with the Dolphins as well, so I'm sure he's hearing that from some pretty notable people.
Where there's smoke, there's fire. I would love this hire, and again, we talk about the potential of later on down the road making this guy your head coach. I wouldn't mind McDaniel especially maybe depending on, we'll cross this bridge when we come to it. But if you give him a better quarterback than Tua, like, imagine the possibilities, especially with some of the ways he had that offense down in Miami humming. So your thought on the Mike McDaniel situation?
I mean, it'd be a big hire. There's no way around it. It'd be a pretty massive deal, and honestly, like pretty impressive for Bowles and the Bucs. To be able to convince a guy like Mike McDaniel to come and look. I mean, maybe that's a situation where if the Bucs offense is good. And let's say, Todd Bowles decides to hang it up. Like maybe, is Mike McDaniel the Bucs the next head coach, right? But obviously, you got to cross that bridge when you get to it. But that'd be pretty impressive for the Buccaneers to be able to land a guy like that who immediately is going to be a lot of teams' top offensive coordinator candidate. The Commanders were one team that made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Mike McDaniel obviously used to be in Washington there, but they hired David Blau as their offensive coordinator. So that is one team that you can cross off the list. Obviously, the Lions are a team with apparent interest there. I know a lot of people will think, well, obviously he's going to go to the Lions, duh. But there's a couple other things here, right? One, Dan Campbell took play calling away from, I believe his name's John Morton, their offensive coordinator. So who's to say that the offense doesn't struggle that McDaniel would get play calling taken away from him by Dan Campbell? That's not going to happen with Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles is not going to be taking over offensive play calling. And also, he's in Miami. You don't have to move very far, right? Like, you don't have to uproot your family if you don't want to, right? So I think that's another factor as well. Like, even if it is just for a year, you don't have to completely uproot your family.
I don't know if it was fake. It very easily could have been AI generated, and maybe I just wasn't looking long enough. I was scrolling very quickly. Did you see that picture of him at Disney World?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's real. I'm just not 100% sure when it was taken.
Right,
because there's no proof of when it was.
Yeah, it easily could have been in the last year or two. It could have been something completely outside the realm of what's going on. But I like the idea that he's just at Disney World right now, kicking it up in a Disney resort, thinking about his options. Just keep driving an hour south, and you'll be right where you need to be. But I think that would be a fun option. Ultimately, when it comes to this offensive coordinator search, I think this is just another step to circle things back to Jason Licht. I think the Bucs have to knock it out of the park with this hire, one way or the other.
For sure.
You're looking at the improvements that we're going to need to see from the Bucs on the defensive side of the ball. That's the given. But the shortcomings of this Bucs offense in 2025, the second half of the season, when they were the healthiest they had been all year, it was just simply unacceptable. And you're going to need someone who has more answers than this Buccaneers offensive coaching staff had in the second half of last year. So it feels like, again,
if they get it wrong, it's going to cost Todd Bowles his job. Like, it's that simple. Like, you get it wrong again, like, it's going to cost you your job.
That's where the pressure's on for Jason Licht. He's got, I mean, Todd Bowles has got a big say in this process as well. I'm not sure what the distribution of say is.
But they both have input, obviously.
Yeah,
though.
Absolutely. And I think it is a heavy offseason pending. These guys have a lot of boxes to check, and they have their work cut out for them. But we will see what the Bucs ultimately end up doing. Just last little side note here. I think last time I saw it, I think Spot Rack had a list out. The Bucs are right around $36 million in cap space as we speak.
I believe they'll end up with about 50 when it's all said and done.
Okay. So a couple of things to get
but,
off the
I mean,
books.
we talk about it every year. Depending on how far they want to do it, they can create a bunch of money. I mean, depending on how far you're willing to go down the road, right? Like, they can create like another $50-60 million. Like, they can have well over 100. Will they? No. Like, that would require them restructuring pretty much everybody that can be restructured. But I would expect them to do a little bit of that, like a little bit of restructuring here and there.
Yeah, and I mean, they're no strangers to that part of the process before. In the Brady,
it's a part of the game now at this point.
It really is. I know the cap management is a little bit different because you're not dealing with as much dead money as you were. But one of the big narratives surrounding Jason Licht over the last 3 years is how they continued to keep things stable from a financial perspective with the retirement of Tom Brady, moving on from that era, deciding to eat all of that cap space at one time and then recovering from the ground up, if you will. That was, at the time, I think the largest dead cap hit in the history of the NFL. So we will see how this offseason goes, and we will keep you posted every step of the way. But I want to say thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with us on today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. You can follow the show Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. You can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL. And check out his written work at BucsNation.com. You got anything for the offseason?
So I did have an article out yesterday, I believe, about the Bucs' top offseason needs, just my thoughts on them. Not anything crazy or whatever, but I will actually. It's funny that we did this show today because I am having an article out about Jason Licht and everything coming out here shortly. So stay tuned for that. And then all the great offseason content on BucsNation.com. So stay tuned for that.
You can find myself, Instagram, and Twitter at Rhettakus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. And please check out the Rondé Barber Show. New episodes every Wednesday. This week's episode dropped on Thursday. Bit of an anomaly. It happens sometimes. It is what it is, man. But a lot of great topics covered. Some timely updates as well, because we recorded that episode at the end of the day where the Buccaneers had their coaching purge, right? Tom Moore forced to retire. Nick Rapone, I think, ended up retiring. A couple of other Buccaneers coaches were shown the door. So we got some fresh reactions and insight to that. It was also announced that the Rondé Barber Show is going to be at the big game this year. So there is going to be fresh episodes every single day from Radio Row leading up to the Super Bowl that week. So some very exciting things going on. Thanks to the fine people over at WFLA for giving that show a platform. Thank you to everybody for hanging out with us tonight. I know we went live, again, in the middle of a playoff game. 27-24 right now here in the fourth quarter between the Panthers and the Rams. The Rams are up by 3 with a little over 8 minutes left to play. We are going to watch this one play out and see if the fate of the NFC South has been sealed after this one. Panthers putting up a pretty good fight, though. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off from my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will see you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.